had a chance to answer some of your questions, which we're going to go over in a minute or two. But I thought, given our discussion a couple weeks ago about interfaith issues and terrorism, that we ought to do a follow-up with that. So I have way more information than we're going to have time to go through. So if there's a specific question that you have about something, certainly ask me. If it seems like, if you have a specific area that you're really interested in, ask me about it, because I've probably got it on the slides here and we could talk about it, but I've got more information than we'll possibly need because it's a huge topic, so we're really just going to scratch the surface today. But I wanted to start by talking about stereotyping, because of course we do a lot. We talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago, where when we stereotype a certain people, it's when we take a certain characteristic about them and we over-exaggerate it, or we will generalize a particular characteristic to an entire group, a culture, a religion. And you can see it especially with the Islam community, where one incident or a few isolated incidents are applied to an entire group of people. So one of the reasons that we're doing this today is to kind of dispel some of those myths and look at, well, what is Islam really? Because the negative effects of stereotyping is that we end up having prejudice against people. We have stigmas against them, so people who are Muslim maybe probably are not terrorists, but are still looked at in that way. They're discriminated against, and we also see that Islamophobia is a form of racism in a sense. So it creates conflicts overall. So we're trying to dispel some of those myths. So you can see just from these pictures the kinds of things that are on the internet. I mean, you can just do any Google search on Islam, and these are the kinds of things that will come up. So like this one especially, all I need to know about Islam I learned on 9/11. That's really not true. We actually need to know much more about Islam. What happened on 9/11 really has nothing to do with Islam. We're going to see how that the teachings of Islam are actually very peaceful, but have been used and distorted in a very specific way to support an ideology that is very oppressive and very detrimental to our society. But it's not at all what Islam is about. And we're seeing also that it's especially through the media coverage that these stereotypes are blown up, that they're over-exaggerated. When we see coverage about any Islamic event, we see that it's portrayed in a very negative fashion. And remember, the news is meant to, nowadays, it's meant to sell newspapers. It's meant to sell advertising. And the more you can fan the flames about something, the more coverage you're going to get. So we're going to try to we're going to peel back that layer and look at some of the things that are beneath it. Again, just some more of these, when you look at some of the tweets, social media, just a lot of negative things that go on. Another one here. There's just a lot of rampant hatred about Islam that is completely uninformed. And so some of the stereotypes of Muslims are, all Muslims are terrorists who hate America. That's one. All Muslims hate Jews. Another is that women are subservient to men and men are more valued in Islam. Another stereotype is that men are allowed to beat and rape their wives. That men force women to cover because they cannot resist themselves. That Muslims starve themselves for 30 days for Ramadan. And that all Muslims are Arab. On the other side, we also see when you have instances of terrorist attacks, people will say, well, why isn't the Muslim community speaking out about this? And the thing is, there actually is. I mean, the Muslim community does speak out about this often. But that is not covered in the media. That is not portrayed because that doesn't sell. Peace does not sell. So let's look at your quiz. If anybody didn't get a copy of the quiz, it's right back there on the table. First question was, Islam is an Arabic faith. If you put true, you would be wrong. Arabic is a language, not a faith. Okay? Well, that's all right. And there are many non-Arabic speakers who are Muslims. In fact, the majority of Muslims are not Arabic, which a lot of people don't realize.
They don't speak Arabic.
They don't, and they're not Arabic.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's.
Like, for example. Yeah,
so
for example.
number 2 is false.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of those
So number 2 is false.
that I look at because I know the Arabic people are actually behind a lot of terrorists that aren't publicized either, because it's blamed on Islam.
Right.
You know, and they're behind and even maybe funding some of it. But I'm just, you know, that's so you look at that. So yeah, you think they are, but
They are not. Yeah, they are not. So number 2, Iranians are Arabs. They are not. They're Persians. Remember the old country of Persia? That's what Iranians are. Okay? And remember, in the Bible, Cyrus, who was in Persia, he was actually a protector of the Jews. Okay? So a lot of people forget this, that the origins, when we look back on history and the Bible, yes, there is conflict, but there are also instances of Middle Eastern people being very favorable towards Christians and Jews. These things we don't hear about very often. Number 3, the country of Lebanon has a Christian president. True. His name is Michel Soleiman. Most people don't realize that either. Like, oh, I had no idea. Okay? So this is a Middle Eastern country with a Christian president. There are lots of Christians in the Middle East. A lot of them. And an example of that is number 4. The Middle East Council of Churches includes all major branches of Christians. That is true. The MEC is a major player politically. They're one of the organizations that's trying to work for peace, trying for work for harmony, trying to get the groups together. Again, hardly ever covered in the media, but they're working behind the scenes. The interesting thing is there would probably be more violence and terrorism than there is if this group weren't at work. So we see all the bad things, but we don't see the good things that are happening behind the scenes. And the ELCA has official relations with the MEC. So the ELCA is very much involved in the Middle East. We are trying to do peace work there all the time. Again, hardly ever talked about, but it happens. Number 5. Arabic is the one language which Muslims from around the world can all understand. That is false. Yes, the Quran is written in Arabic. Yes, it is. But most Arabs cannot read the translations because they haven't been taught Arabic. Okay? The same way that in the Bible is made up of basically 2 languages, Hebrew and Greek. Can any of you read Hebrew and Greek? No. But you're still Christian, right? Okay? So, the same way that the Quran has been translated into other languages, they believe that Arabic is the holy language. That if you truly want to understand the Quran, you have to understand the language. That is very true. Jews would say the same thing about Hebrew with the Torah. Christians not so much with the Greek. Like, you know, it's all Greek to me. We're just interested in having it translated. But, you know, having learned Hebrew and Greek, I'm very rusty on it, but there are nuances in the language that you don't get when you read it in the English. So it is really good to learn the original languages, but to just make the assumption that all Muslims understand Arabic is incorrect. Number 6, the first Arab Christians were converted from Islam in 1634. That is false. There were Arabs on the day of Pentecost. Go back and read the Bible, the part in Acts, Acts, I believe it's chapter 1 or chapter 2, Arabs are listed as some of the early converts. So there was no Islam back then, but there were Arab Christians from the very beginning. Okay? Only about 16% of the world's Muslims are Arabs. That is true. 62% of the world's Muslims live in South and Southeast Asia. Now that should shock you, right? You probably did not know that. So we think that Islam is it's this big Arab Middle East thing. No, the majority of them live in South and Southeast Asia. So the country with the most Muslims is Indonesia. Indonesia has the most. That is, and they have the largest percentage of the world's Muslims when you look at all the world's Muslims. So Indonesia, probably didn't know that either, right? I mean, that just is kind of shocking that, Did you get that one right?
So did I.
All right, gold star for you.
So did I.
Did you? Okay, good job, Rachel.
I actually didn't guess.
The last one, I forgot to actually put the true or false, but there are more African American Muslims than Middle Eastern Muslims in the United States. That is true. Nation of Islam, there are more, American-born Muslims in the United States than foreign-born Muslims in the United States. Okay? Any questions about this? Anything that's like, wow, that just really shocks me. Any questions so far? All right, so let's also see if you got your countries right. If you got any of them right. Rachel, how many did you say you got?
13 out of 20.
13 out of 20, because she just finished a unit on the Middle East.
Good.
Very
good. Yeah.
That's
But
good.
but this is important that our children are being taught this. They're being taught geography. She's in 7th grade, so the fact that she was required to memorize these countries, that's a good thing. Probably be a good refresher course for all of us. So, so when you look at your map, go ahead and fill this in. You want to get the major players. The reason why I put this there is because a lot of us don't even have any familiarity with the geography is important. The fact that you've got Pakistan here between India and Afghanistan. That's why there's so much conflict going on there. Because you've got Hinduism and Islam, there's right through the center here, there's a lot of tension, a lot of conflict. You look at, here's China right next to primarily Muslim countries. Very interesting too. A lot of people get this part of the world mixed up, like where Lebanon is, where Israel is. And there's Syria, again, right in the middle of everything. Iraq is your easiest country to locate because this is where the rivers come right up through. The Tigris and Euphrates, that is the heart of the beginnings of civilization. That's where, in the Bible, when you read Genesis, and it talks about the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, there it is. That's the cradle of civilization right here. That's called the Fertile Crescent. In an area where it was dry for the most part, this was a valley that had plenty of water for which to support crops and fruit trees and that sort of thing.
It's also called Mesopotamia.
Middle Eastern civilization.
Yes.
Not Chinese civilization. Not
That's right.
South American civilization.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So it's important to remember that. Hold on, Rachel. I'll get to you in a second.
Okay.
It's important to remember that the biblical story is telling us the how humanity arose from a very Middle Eastern centric perspective. But when you think about, humanity arose on all of the different continents. And so people sometimes wonder, well, how is it that Cain was able to find wives if he was the only child left? Where did they all come from? Well, they're coming from all other parts of the world, okay? So this is the story about how civilization rose in the Middle East. But Dave is correct. It's also rising in South America, North America, China, those sorts of things. Good. Rachel.
I was going to say that Fertile Crescent is also called Mesopotamia.
What's that?
It's also called Mesopotamia.
Yes, Mesopotamia. So in the middle of things, right here. Very good. So you can see where some of these are. Here's Saudi Arabia. They have a conflict going on with Yemen right now. There's your United Arab Emirates. Okay. Notice too. Here's Kuwait. Remember the war, the first Iraq war over Kuwait, and look at where they're positioned here strategically, right on the Persian Gulf. Where's the oil going? In and out through there. So that's one of the reasons why there was conflict in this particular area. And you've got Iran here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the different sects of Muslims. The Shiite and the Sunni. A lot of these divisions of the countries are in some ways artificially imposed. They're imposed by Western colonialism. But the area really is made up of lots of different tribes of peoples based on their relationship to Muhammad and the bloodlines. And when you hear about the conflicts between them, a lot of it goes back to that. So this is a very artificial Western imposition of political lines. Okay, so what is Islam? Does Islam teach violence? No, there is no terrorism taught in Islam. In the Holy Quran, it teaches if anyone killed a person not in retaliation of murder and to spread mischief in the land, it would be as if he killed all humankind. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of all humankind. Okay? So it's really important to emphasize that Islam does not teach violence. Now, are there Muslim people who are violent? Yes. Same way there are Christian people who are violent. Remember in our Bible, it tells people to go kill the heathens, the men, women, and children. It's in our Bible to do that. So you can use any scripture to justify if you want to go kill people. But the scripture itself in Islam, in the Holy Quran, does not teach this. Islam is a religion of peace, and it means submission to the will of Allah. Allah is the name of God for them. Are they criminals? No. They're not terrorists. Islam means one who submits to God and keeps peace. So let's go over some of the basics. Remember I said here, when you look at Islam, you've got your two basic tribes, the Sunni and the Shia. And there was a dispute after Muhammad died on who would be the inheritor of his, who would be his inheritor, who would be the one in charge. And there were some that said that it had to go along bloodlines, and there were some that said it just had to go along the lines of who was most in keeping with his ideals. But even within these two tribes, of course, we've got another whole tribe here that are actually kind of going extinct. Another one here. It's just the school of the law. But you've got all of these other tribes, when you look here, in the same way that Christianity has all different denominations. Originally there was a split between Orthodox and Catholic, and then in the Catholic Church, we split the Protestants and the Catholics, and then the Protestants splintered into hundreds of different denominations, okay? Well, the same thing happens in Islam. So to try to say that all Muslims are a certain way and to have this sort of monolithic view of Islam would be to say the same thing about Christians, which just simply isn't true. Because you don't believe the same thing as some of the people on TV who claim to be Christian, right? You're like, that's not what I think. So when they claim that this is the Christian perspective, that's highly disputed. Same thing with Islam. And then you've got this Sufi order. And the Sufi mystics are the ones that are very much into the poetry and nonviolence. They are the ones that very much teach peace. The whirling dervishes, the ones that spin and spin and spin and spin, that comes out of the Sufi That's a practice of Sufism. Okay, so so again, lots of variety within the Muslim world. So your Shia Muslims believe that only descendants of Muhammad can be caliphs. The caliphs are basically the ones who are in charge. They're like the Pope, sort of, but not the same thing. The Sunni Muslims believe that caliphs do not have to be descendants of Muhammad. However, they do both believe there is only one God, the Quran is the holy book of Islam, and they practice the 5 pillars. So when you hear those in the news about the conflicts, that's what they're talking about. It goes back to the 500s and what they believe about that. Okay, so Islam means perfect submission to Allah and testifying to complete monotheism and freedom from polytheism and disobedience to Allah. Okay? Yeah, Dave.
There's a widespread belief that the Sunnis and Shias are just going to have to fight each other all the time throughout history and forever. And my impression is that's totally wrong. But a lot of people believe that. What do you think?
Yeah, again, that kind of coverage is what sells papers.
Yeah.
But there are lots of intermarriages between Sunni and Shia. There are lots of instances where Sunni and Shia see like this is ridiculous that we can't get along. But that doesn't get coverage. That's all behind the scenes, and they, the ones that do not want to go along these partisan lines see each other as brothers and sisters, and see themselves as one religion and having the same principles. So the bloodlines are not as important to them.
They haven't been in military conflict with each other for much of the history of Islam, have they?
Well, no, there's been conflict all along.
Okay.
But, yeah.
From what I've heard, read, what we're told, or whatever, is it they were saying, if I have it right, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni.
Yes.
And he ran the country with the Sunni people, and he was against the Shia. So there was a lot of conflict between those two groups.
Yes.
And then after he was eliminated, they put somebody else in charge who, was he a Shia? Or another
I can't
Sunni?
remember.
But he left the people out of the government that they wanted so that they could both work together. And that out of that group kind of came this group of the Taliban and all them, because they were left out and not part of the Iraq redevelopment after it was destroyed by the coalitions.
Yeah, I mean,
So
the whole way the war was handled, why there was a war in the first place, I mean, that's a big topic that we don't have time to get into.
Right.
Yes, there has been conflict all along.
But see, the other part of it is, I was going to say too, is they said that Saddam Hussein, even though they were bad things that he did to the people, but he kept them under control. They were actually living together. The Sunnis and the Shias were living together. But it was through his bad way of dealing with the people, from what they say.
And he tried to annex Kuwait. And
well,
that's
he
what
went in and messed that whole thing up.
right.
Yeah.
And that threatened American access to fossil fuels. So yeah. So the oil thing, I mean, back before oil became part of the picture, there were really good relations between Christians and Muslims. Christians would send missionaries, not necessarily to convert, but to help. And they were very highly regarded, very well respected in those countries. Once oil got introduced into the picture, that changed everything. It really changed everything. Because then it becomes a question of power, wealth, who controls it. That changed everything.
That's what I was trying to say. The British had a policy for running the world, which was called divide and conquer.
Yes.
And my understanding was that in the Ottoman Empire, Christians, Jews, and Muslims got along for 500 years so well, it just got boring. It just got boring. And then the British had to decide whether they wanted to work with the Ottoman administration or replace it and start dividing and conquering and dividing it up. Yeah. And now our basis for being in the Middle East the way we are is that oh, well, these people are always fighting, so now we have to go help because they're fighting each other. But I think that it's the opposite. I think it's our involvement that helped, as you were saying, help cause that. And it's the reason we're there now.
Yes,
you know?
and we have some responsibility for it. Yes, exactly. No, you're exactly right. Yes, that is an accurate. And when you talk with Christian Muslim scholars, like Christian scholars who study Islam, they will reinforce that. David Grafton is the instructor in Islamic studies at the Lutheran Seminary. So the Lutheran Seminary has a professor of Islamic studies. So I think that should tell you something right there, that the Lutherans are concerned about, really good relations with this. And he emphasized repeatedly exactly what you just said, that we bear a responsibility. We sowed a lot of the seeds of what we're now reaping. And for us to continue to perpetuate these stereotypes and myths just feeds into it and does not in any way help to lead towards peace. So, good. So the start of Islam is marked in the year 610. That's when Islam started, following the first revelation to the Prophet Muhammad at the age of 40. Muhammad and his followers spread the teachings of Islam throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Soon after the death of the Prophet, there were military expeditions called futuhat, or literally openings, into what is now Egypt and other parts of North Africa. In other parts of the world, Islam spread through trade and commerce. And that comes from PBS has got a great timeline. There are good, you have to be really careful about what resources you look at on the internet, but reputable ones can be really helpful. So Muhammad, 570 CE, is born in Mecca. Like I said, he is visited by the angel Gabriel in a cave. He receives the Quran. He didn't write it. He received it. Okay? So Muhammad is not worshipped in Islam. He is highly regarded. He's regarded as the last prophet of God. Jesus is also regarded as a prophet of God. And I have up here, if anybody would like them, here is a sheet on Jesus and Christians in the Quran. I have here communal identity in the Middle East, and also families of churches in the Middle East. So, like I said, we don't have time to go through all of this, but if it's something that you would like to do some more reading on, these were provided by David Grafton, and they can be very helpful. I'm going to skip through this. So, notice here in 641, Muslims enter Egypt and rout the Byzantine army. Muslims consider their conquest as liberation of subjugated people, since in most instances they were under oppressive rule. So when we think about, thinking about the stereotype of Muslims as, being military conquerors, a lot of times in the beginning they were going into areas where people were already oppressed, and they were considering what they were doing to be liberating them. Okay. 5 pillars of Islam. This was your question number 10 on your sheet. Did anybody get all 5 of them? Anybody get one? You got one? Which one did you get?
I got 3.
Did anyone get
Did anybody get one?
I got 3.
Rachel got 3. Which ones did you get, Rachel?
I had Salat, San, and Zakat.
You actually knew the Arabic words for it too? I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Yay. All right, so the Shahada is the declaration of believing in Allah and his that Muhammad is his prophet and the messenger of Allah. That's the foundation, okay? Salat is their prayer that they pray 5 times a day. Now think about this, okay? Can you imagine, as a Christian, stopping everything that you're doing 5 times a day, getting out your prayer rug, figuring out where Mecca is, and praying? Being a Muslim is hard work. It's like every day you're doing this. Not when you feel like it, not when it's convenient for you. You do this every day if you're a good Muslim. So you pray before sunrise, so you're getting up before the sun comes up, okay? You're praying in the early afternoon, the late afternoon, after sunset, and at night. You got to have some respect for people that are doing this.
Are the younger people doing that?
Yes. If they're good practicing Muslims, they're doing this.
But I wonder if they're getting away with that with the younger generation. You know what I mean?
Like Catholics that don't do birth control.
Right. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. I'd have to talk with somebody who actually is more in touch with what practicing Muslims do today to see, are they watering this down? Do they just do it? Do they make it 3 times a day? Like, are different levels of participation?
It would have to be, in a sense, because they're in America, and the workforce in America, if they're working in America, companies aren't giving them the time to do that.
The conveyor belt to pray.
Well, they just had one instance out in one of the states where they had a meat packing company, and they had a problem with. They said that they didn't have time to do the prayers and stuff because they didn't have people to relieve them so that they could go do what they wanted.
I mean, I know, and
they ended up they fired them because they said kind of it influenced their workforce that they couldn't get work done. But they had a room for them. They had a place for them to do it.
Interesting.
But they had to do it on their own, on their break.
Basically, they had to find their time during the day.
Right. Yeah. So it makes for a difficult situation if you're practicing whatever you practice, and you're the subaltern, which means that you're in a culture that does not practice what you practice, and even Christianity is facing some of these same challenges. Do you know how hard it is to try to get to church for some families when, soccer practice is on Sunday mornings, and all of these sports, kids are exhausted from their play practices the night before, and all they want to do is sleep. I mean, Sundays, the Sabbath is no longer respected. We don't have the blue laws anymore. So, in some sense, people say, "Well, we're a Christian country." No, not really. We're very much we've very much moved away from that. So it makes it difficult if you're a person of faith to try to keep up with these practices. When you do, it provides an anchor for your life. And so I think it's important to respect that they're trying to do this, because it's an amazing thing. If you can actually pray, actually remember to do this, that's fantastic. I applaud that. Yeah, Dave.
Then you have a question like, which countries are more secular? Because we have the impression that these Middle Eastern countries, they're all, sort of radical Muslims. But what I've heard is that countries like Turkey and Iran may be much more secular than the United States of America.
Yes. Yeah. Again, there's no monolithic view. That the way different countries, Muslim countries, the level to which they are practicing is very different. The other assumption is that all Muslim countries are theocracies. That means that the religious people are the ones who are making the laws. That simply isn't the case. It's very rarely the case. Now, the ones who would want to make it that way often will resort to military means to try to impose that. But there are very few theocracies in the world. So there is this, the state and religion tension is not just in America. It's throughout the world. Well, that's a good point, Dave. So another one is fasting, Psalm. And during the month of Ramadan, they give up food and drink during the daylight hours. Okay? So the idea that, they're just starving themselves for 30 days. No, they just can't eat. They can eat at sundown. And the reason for this is, remember, it's all about submission to God. And we often forget, we don't think about how much our stomachs have dominance over us. I have my students in my classes try a 24-hour fast where all they can drink is water. Oh my gosh. You'd think I'd be asking them to, commit self-abuse or something. But when they do it, and they realize, oh my gosh, I really am kind of a slave to my stomach. And it was really interesting to do this exercise of self-discipline. And then they use that time, like whenever you're starting to feel hungry, you turn to God in prayer so that you remember that it's God who gives me my life. Not just, what did Jesus say? You shall not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Well, Muslims put this into practice 1 month out of the year. Got to give them props on that. That's really great. Another thing that is commanded is almsgiving. Okay, you know how hard it is to try to get people to give offering in the church, and what is the standard for us? What percentage do we encourage? 10%. Theirs is not quite as high, but it's required of everyone. Like, you have to do this. So almsgiving, you give of your personal wealth to help people in need and support the Muslim community. Okay? So it's built in. It's part of who they are. It's part of what they do. And then the fifth pillar is the Hajj, making the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your lifetime if you are physically able and financially able. And one of my students who is Muslim for my last semester class, she has made the Hajj, I think, twice. And she said it's really amazing. Like, you go in, and I should have had a picture up here, but the Kabbalah, it's the the big black building, and that's where they go, and you go around this, and it's just this sea of people. And she said you just kind of get caught up in it, and you go around. I think it's like 7 times, and everybody wears white because it's a sign of purity, just like Christians. When we baptize, we have you're supposed to wear white. So she said it's an amazing experience just to be part of this group of people who are all doing the same thing, the same practice, the same ritual. She said it's really quite amazing to be caught up with that. I think. Okay, we only have like 4 minutes left, and I knew I wasn't going to get through it all, so we might have to break this into 2 parts and do something else like after Lent. But the term jihad, I really wanted to talk about that, because people often think that Muslims are violent because of the word jihad. They think it means holy war. That is not what jihad means. Jihad means exertion of effort, and it is about remember, to be a Muslim is to submit your will to God. So it's a struggle to do that because we're all very self-centered. We want to be the ones in control. We don't want to give God control. So your jihad is supposed to be internal. It's the work that you do through those 5 pillars to put your life and your faith and your hope in God. That's what jihad is. So when people who are Muslim take that term and make it mean holy war in an external way, they're distorting what it means. That is not the intention. Okay? The same way that, when Jesus said, "Go into all nations and baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," some Christians, during certain periods of time, took that to mean that you go into countries, you invade them, and you tell them, either let us baptize you or we'll what? Kill you. Okay? Is that what Jesus intended? No, of course not. But think about this, if you're in one of those countries where you're not Christian, and here come these Christians, and they're saying, well, this is, Jesus told us to do this. What are you going to be thinking about Jesus? Jesus is a man of war. That's a terrible thing. And we know that is not what Jesus represents. We would be horrified, okay? So Muslims, the majority of Muslims, like 98% of Muslims, see what's happening when these people take this term and use it in this distorted way. It's horrifying for them, okay? But because of all of these other influences, the economic, the political, and the ideological, that is what contributes to this. So you can take any theological concept and use it in a way to dominate. But to say that the entire religion is a religion of war is absolutely incorrect. Any questions about that? No questions. Okay, so that's all we have time for. I wish we had time to do more, because I want to do the whole thing about, like, why do women wear the veil, and do they oppress women? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, after Lent, because during Lent, we're going to have a Bible study, and a couple of you are actually leading that, Dave and Cammie, and so please come during Lent, during this time. They're going to be looking at the Gospel of Luke and looking at the topic of health, healing, and wholeness. And they're all working very hard to prepare these studies, so please come out and support them in this. I'm going to be working with our young people again, doing Quizzle with them, so I'm going to have them down in the youth room. And then after Lent, we'll pick this up Because I think people are, are you interested? Is this interesting to you? Is it helpful? Yes? Okay. So we'll be talking about, women and the veiling. We'll talk more about why is there so much conflict in these countries? And if there are other questions that you have that we didn't get to today, just write it on a piece of paper and put it in my box, and I'll make sure when we come back, I address that in the next time together. Okay? So thank you very much. I hope this was helpful to you, and we'll now get ready for the service.